know that I think I was up until midnight doing emails, so I can't imagine how busy you all are. And it really goes toward just your ethic of sharing and of being open about what you guys are learning as some of the leaders in the field. The three of you coming on here today, this morning, to help people around the world. Again, we've got hundreds of folks signing in, watching this live. We've got hundreds more that usually watch it on demand within the first couple of weeks, and many more after that, sometimes thousands. But we really want to thank you, because we know it, prep time and all that, it takes time, and we appreciate you for that. So first, I'd like to start with some introductions. This is a really critical topic. We have seen the transformation, and again, I used it earlier yesterday. We don't say the word revolution very much at HitLab when everyone was talking about the .com revolution, and we were doing studies and seeing that, yeah, people were using the web here and there, but mostly for news and sports pages and trading, and that's about it. And you know, the website stuff, you know, people are charging Merck $150 million to build a website for heart disease and stuff, and we were saying, we're not seeing the ROI there. Why are we spending $150 million on a website? So the word revolution gets tossed a lot in industry, and inflection points and things like that. But for the first time since I've been affiliated with the lab, people are saying revolution, and they're meaning it. And we're seeing that. What does that mean? The revolution, there's two types of revolutions. There's like the industrial revolution that takes 40, 50 years. That's a kind of large macroeconomic revolution. And then there's the kind of like the French Revolution, where you wake up one morning and there's a new government. And that's a different type of revolution, where the aristocracy is overthrown, and within, you know, a week or two or a year, you have an entirely different new political model, economic model. That's our true revolution. And I think that's what we're looking at here. I think most people would agree. This is the true digital revolution that we're seeing in healthcare. The adoption of telemedicine has gone, not just, you know, like New York Presbyterian, where they had about 1,000 telemedicine visits a week in January first week, to 50,000 in, you know, kind of end of March. That, you know, that's an extraordinary revolution, the adoption there, but also the number of hospitals utilizing telemedicine as frontline interventions, digital front doors, things like that. So we're going to talk about this today. And, you know, first, let's get some backgrounds, and just if you could talk for 2 minutes each about your journey, your background, that would be really helpful. Alicia, let's start with you. You're at the top of my Zoom box here, my 4 squares, if you will. You know, just a couple of minutes about your background and your journey.
Sure. So again, thank you for having us this morning. I think this is going to be a valuable conversation, very timely, given everything that's going on in the world. Just a brief introduction. My name is Alicia Staley. I am a 3-time cancer survivor. And I have been in the life sciences industry now for about 10 years. I come to the industry from a career in information systems and technology and financial services. But basically my professional career and my experience with cancer has sort of been running in parallel with each other. So I was first diagnosed with cancer when I was 19 years old. And upon graduation from college, got right into information systems and financial services technology. But I guess I was always struck by how far ahead financial services in some aspects were. But when I would go to the cancer center for an appointment, I was still filling out pieces of paper, you know, making just a very manually intensive paper-based process to care for my health. And I think just over the years grew really frustrated with sort of the lack of a revolution, I guess, if you will, in how we were using digital tools in the healthcare space, and really sort of grew into a career in trying to improve the patient experience using technology. And for me, it's both not only a professional goal, but really a personal goal, because I'd really like to change the patient experience from the inside out, just based on the process that I had to go to get to where I am today as a very healthy, happy 30-year-plus cancer survivor. So thanks for having me today.
Yeah, that's an amazing background. Thank you, Alicia. And, you know, being a researcher, I tend to multitask, and I just looked you up on LinkedIn, and just, you know, you graduated from Syracuse, so go Orange. You know, one of the few schools in the Northeast with a proud football tradition. We love that. Having two daughters that went to 2 Big Ten schools, it's always good to see people coming out of
absolutely
institutes in the Northeast that actually have football programs. Well, great background. I can see how you and Glenn must get along so well, because that's really, what his story and Medidata is starting at Columbia Medical Center in Washington Heights in 1998. I think he probably was walking around his departmental hallways. He worked in the cancer department. I think pediatric oncology, I think that might have been it. But he probably saw patients like you, struggling to do forms and papers and stuff like that. And I can, again, hats off to you for your journey and wonderful story. Matt, not to put you on the spot to have to follow up on that, but if you could talk to us a little bit about your background and your journey as well, and in digital health and in clinical trials, it'd be great.
Yeah, it's tough. And kudos, Alicia, to you for being a 3-time cancer survivor. That's truly incredible.
Thanks, Matt.
So my name is Matt Moyer. I'm with Merck, and just a quick caveat, because I noticed there was a typo on the intro slide. I'm not with the EMD Serrano Merck. I'm with the Merck & Co. Inc., or known as MSD outside the US. So just want to clarify that. Been with Merck for 17 years. My educational background is actually chemistry and pharmaceutical sciences. And you may wonder, how did I get to kind of where I am now from a digital journey perspective? In around 2015, Merck, we decided to start investing in technologies or exploring technologies to allow us to better understand the opportunity to shift trials more virtually to the patient. I was very interested in that opportunity, and it ultimately got involved, especially on one aspect of it. And it became so successful internally that I was actually able to justify a new role for myself in the company as director in supply chain technologies, to allow us to fully invest from a person perspective into a full-time position, and now actually a group to support this kind of effort. So the digital transformation has not only affected the ecosystem, but affected the internal company as well, and how we recognize ultimately the need to invest in order to be able to succeed with actual individuals. But my role is to date is actually primarily in installing technologies, developing or identifying and vetting and installing technologies to improve our clinical supply production or our clinical supply management. So the supply chain itself, with the aim of ensuring that we can maintain continuous global supply, and that we can disseminate or distribute that supply effectively while still providing full visibility to utilization of that supply all the way down to the patient level.
An extraordinary background there. I think, one of the things I think everyone's become a lot more astute at, Matt, over the last 12 months is, what is supply chain? I think that most people a year ago, they weren't ordering groceries online to go to the doorstep, and they weren't ordering medications to go to their house online, and they certainly weren't doing telemedicine. So that the word supply chain now, and I think we see it, right? We see Amazon hiring, I think I read 450,000 people. It's unprecedented, the hiring spree that Amazon's going on right now, and they're obviously moving into healthcare. So, I think the word supply chain now has become one of the center points of our lexicon in American society, and I think you and I got to know each other just several months ago, maybe, and certainly the work with what the United Nations is doing right now in WHO and supply chain, and now with the distribution of the vaccine. I think every other talk show is about the supply chain. And so I've got, I'm hearing governors, I'm reading about, different cabinet members talking about the supply chain, and it's an extraordinary notion, and again, sobering in a lot of ways to see how much and how fast the ecosystem, and again, I use the word revolution very, very carefully and cautiously, but we are seeing, I don't know if you've read about this, Matt, if people are calling this a supply chain revolution, but it seems like we're headed that way, or we're in that right now.
Yeah, I think you find that a lot of people become acutely aware of something only when it becomes a problem, right? And the supply chain has become a problem, partly because of the inability to do things in person, partly because of the sensitivity of our medications and the need for cold distribution of those medications. I'm sure many of you have read about the Pfizer vaccine that requires -80 storage for, imagine getting that from point A to point B, which might be, Africa or some very remote nation, or even a remote area in the US. That could even be the same there, while maintaining that supply chain and the integrity of the medication to its endpoint. It becomes incredibly challenging, and people become astutely aware because of it.
Super, fantastic. And Michael, again, the part of that supply chain and part of that value chain issue that we're looking at within the virtual patient experience and optimizing that is that last mile from the clinical trial center to the patient home. Talk to us a little bit about your background in 20 years of developing information mediary and these extraordinary intelligent packaging solutions.
Well, thank you, Stan, and it's an honor to be with Alicia and Mark and Matt. Sorry, we actually have done some work with both of your companies, and hope to expand on that in future. And hopefully, we can deliver the kind of value that you're actually expecting, and deliver the smooth sort of integration effort and data flow that we promised. So our journey began in 2002. I'm a co-founder of Information Mediary Corporation. I've met Stan, I think, in 2003 when I was still walking around New York City with laptops, forgetting my power supply back home, and the battery would last 15 minutes. So I didn't have long to do my demos back then. GCP was still kind of a new word on the scene, and digital health hadn't even been coined yet. Yet we thought that the importance of medication non-adherence was such a pervasive problem in both clinical research and therapies that we wanted to do something about that, and basically not build a better mousetrap, but actually invent a mousetrap to address the issue of non-adherence and the total lack of data that is common in clinical research, where basically nobody knows when and if a patient actually took their medication. So as I said, if Washington Heights is a good omen, then I'd like to commend Dr. Ogedebke, who had his little office up there and was critical in diffusing our smart bottle cap around all kinds of research institutes around New York and beyond, which has paid dividends both to us and, of course, the researchers that are benefiting from the technology. So we've done a lot of work that, and I've spent a lot of time up there. So it's a great place.
Indeed, I would agree with that for sure. I think I think that when we look at all the good things that have come out of Washington Heights, Hamilton, the author and the writer and the dancer that put Hamilton together, the famous Broadway play, comes from Washington Heights. If you're a Red Sox fan, Manny Ramirez comes from Washington Heights. So a lot of good things coming out of the Heights over the last 30 years. So Alicia, you guys are in Medidata. All the work that you're doing has really been extraordinary. Tell us a little bit about how you would define the virtual patient experience in clinical trials.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think a lot of people approach the virtual experience from very different perspectives at times. And I think I try to anchor my definition from the patient perspective, really. So I think we focus on delivering a virtual experience that allows the patient or the person participating in the clinical trial to really interact with the clinical trial from any location. So it's sort of removing the geographical boundaries. It's really removing some barriers to participation in a clinical trial. So it's everything from being able to log in and complete daily surveys or daily questionnaires from either your computer or your phone. It's wearing a sensor or perhaps some sort of wearable device that will collect data about how you're physically doing that can feed back into the clinical trial. So it's really delivering an experience that makes sense for the patient, we hope. In a way that allows them to continue living their lives and sort of going about their day with minimal disruption. That to me is really what virtualizing the clinical trial experience is like and should be like.
Yeah, I think we're seeing that in so many different ways, whether it's how people are using Apple Watches or their Alexa to even speak and collect data verbally. And the technologies are changing every day. And Matt, you kind of alluded to that in your opening remarks, just about your journey. And what is from the supply chain perspective, how do you and your team define the virtual patient and their journey, and what do you focus on in that definition?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. We think about the diversity in our clinical trials primarily from a patient perspective, a demographics perspective, but inclusive of that demographics is the geography, right? And we're seeing more and more disparate geographies associated with the trials, either because we're pursuing orphan indications or hard to reach patients for one reason or another. What's exacerbated that is the pandemic, right? And the inability of individuals to travel to anywhere, potentially if the country's in full lockdown. And so developing an ecosystem that supports that remote engagement and that gets the medication to the patient in the way that's effective to them and provides us visibility to the utilization of that medication so that we have chain of custody to what happened, who signed for what the patient used from a medication perspective when ingestion or dosing occurred, and can use that data to better model our own drugs, understand efficacy and safety, and make better decisions on what to progress and what's working, I think are all critical components of all of that. And they require kind of a fully integrated ecosystem that's inclusive of both the virtual or digital, as well as the physical, the drug itself.
Yeah, I think that's, that brings a different perspective in, and those signals and that data coming in, they do a lot. They help inform a lot. What are some of the key value attributions from having that kind of data for the virtual patient experience and making it better?
I mean, I think so. It could be a combination. It's adherence, certainly, understanding when dosing, if and when dosing occurred, not using pill count, because that's an old gold standard. And the FDA is more recently published guidance informing of the value of enriched data via things like digital, or smart packaging. It's also, wearable sensors, other things that will provide us contextual data, either continuous or even periodic contextual data on what a patient is experiencing from a symptoms perspective, and even from a quality of life perspective. You think about what you can measure in a meaningful way remotely versus what you get in an episodic or very static clinic visit that could be influenced by the patient's lack of desire to be at the clinic with it in front of a doctor they're not familiar with, or other factors associated with their travel from their home to the clinic. The value of the kind of in situ data, whether it's continuous or even periodic, that could be collected via wearables, gives you not only better data for things that we can measure today, but things that you couldn't even measure without sensors that are available today.
Okay. That's helped a lot. And I think, you've already started really diving into this nicely, because we've got, continuous versus asynchronous and, kind of maybe once a day, once a week kind of data. And then you've got, this in situ, which is an important distinction to understand as well within the data collection and how that works, and that the value that can attribute to the physician in their clinical trial decision-making process in terms of just understanding, and certainly the sponsor and the not just the investigator, but the sponsor and the entire team trying to understand what's happening with that patient experience. I think that's why, this entire talk is actually labeled optimizing the patient experience. And I think that's well said there. So thank you, Matt. And then Michael, again, that last mile and understanding the definition from your point of view as one of the leaders in intelligent adherence solutions over the last 20 years. When we think about the definition of virtual patient, what are some of the things that come to mind for you?
Well, a few things. First of all, virtual clinical trials or decentralized trials is one thing. And it's certainly hypercritical to assure that the dosing data, the condition of the drug, the type of medication in terms of titrated packaging that has been ingested or removed from the package at very least is known, because these known data points affect the way that these the bioinformatics teams can actually go ahead and analyze and covary the outputs from various other factors. So virtual clinical trials are taking on a kind of a new flavor nowadays, and sometimes I think we're talking about synthetic arms now, synthetic research trial arms, which are referred to as virtual trials. And then, of course, you're using existing arms that have been studied and the data therefrom. And if you are not collecting accurate data now, you're not going to be able to synthesize your trials or certain trial arms in future. So that's, of course, now even more critical, not just to your present research, but also for the ability of your machine learning, your AI tools, as you talked in your introduction, to actually utilize this data. What we had found in the past, obviously over 20 years, we've done a few supply projects for smart packaging. In fact, we're probably the only company who's supplied smart blisters in any real world setting. In one particular blockbuster research trial, we supplied over 600,000 smart blister packages over many years. And it resulted not only in data that was previously known to be, lacking or defective essentially, and created proper data, but it also unearthed and uncovered a lot of patient behaviors that weren't previously known. So we're moving these unknown factors into the realm of known factors. We're addressing the known things that need to be addressed, and we're creating better tools for the informatics people and the research community to analyze their outcomes.
That's great. All right, perfect. And so, Alicia, we've talked a little bit about now the definition about the virtual patient, about this trial experience, and Michael's just elucidated and really gone into some nice detail around some of the elements of that definition and bringing it forward in the future, including things like machine learning. And one of the things that, again, just the Medidata team is always thinking, and I can't decide if Medidata is more of a software company or a data science company or a clinical trials company. Medidata's got so many different aspects to it. It seems like Tarek and Glenn are always adding on new things and doing really awesome stuff. So when you look at what you guys have done with social media, it just blows my mind. It's hard to keep up. You're a digital health geek, a health IT geek, when you spend your weekend evenings looking at YouTube videos of Medidata and trying to understand, okay, this is the newest app, this is the newest API. And so anyway, and you guys do a great job on social media with YouTube and Twitter. I love it. But the continuum that you put together around social impact and social media, how can social media actually do that? How are you guys using social media to improve the continuum of care and create these kind of measurable benefits for patients to even further enhance that kind of virtual patient experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think even before I got to Medidata, I, from a personal perspective, had been using social media quite a bit to connect with other patients that were long-term cancer survivors. So I sort of had a heads up as to how patients were making these connections online. So, really when somebody is struggling with a question, the first thing they do now is go online. They're going to type a question into Google or a search engine. They're going to, find other people on Facebook or Twitter or even Instagram that are talking about something that they might be dealing with. And that social connection is really that first step in that continuum of care. And I think what we're finding is as these social networks continue to mature and the number of patient communities that are on Facebook or the virtual communities that are created on Twitter, they're having these conversations and they're looking for information, they're looking for clinical trials. And, I really believe that social media is really an untapped resource for connecting with patients that are dealing with similar conditions, that are looking for clinical research opportunities. And I think that there's still an element of how to utilize that in, a company that might be trying to advance a clinical trial. How can they reach out to patients on social media? So we've taken, the industry has taken the first steps in figuring out how to run approved ads and outreach on these different networks. But I really feel like there's that has to be more ingrained in the work that we do upfront to prepare a site or a sponsor for clinical research opportunities. I think there's just valuable information that's out there, valuable connections that patients have already made, because in some situations they're probably in a very desperate situation looking for information or looking for connections that will help them find that next clinical trial that might perhaps prolong their life. And there's a wealth of information out there that I think we still need to figure out how to wrap our hands around, and really and do it in a way that honors the work that patients have done to create these networks or to create these connections. So you have to be very transparent and trustworthy, particularly when you're stepping into a space like this, because there's some, patient communities that have done a lot of work to make important connections, share information. And, I like to say that information is a currency for patient networks. That's how patient networks share information. That's how they exchange value in some ways. And I think that, social media is really an untapped resource for how we can help patients learn more about clinical trials, learn more about opportunities that they might be able to participate in, and really begin to sort of expand that continuum, I guess, if you will, or expand that landscape where we can begin to really build an information sharing ecosystem.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think, part of that, I mean, Matt, can you ever see yourself using Facebook data or Twitter data or, this YouTube data and the supply chain stuff that you guys do? I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always ways to leverage. I know we use it in other facets. I don't see why we wouldn't also use it from a supply chain perspective. Certainly like the ability to learn from others who are, equally or more skilled or deal with more challenging supply chains from a volumes perspective than we do. And so you can get that a lot of times on, by the mining of data. Certainly there's a lot of AI or analytics that go along with the analysis of supply chain data that might come from a source like that.
Yeah.
Dan, I just want to add one thing. We've already seen case studies come from other industries where they're paying attention to signals that they see on social media alerts them to product, low supply of product in different areas of the country. So, I've heard about, if they're starting to see more tweets come in or more Facebook posts about a product's unavailable, or they just came out of CVS and the CVS was out of stock again, that it's a signal. There's signals that come from these networks if you're listening to what the people are talking about, that potentially could alert the supply chain team that, hey, we're low stock on this side of the country, or we need to be paying attention to why people can't find our product. So a lot of good opportunities out there, I'd say.
I guess it wouldn't come as a surprise that temperature chips are sold out around the world right now.
Exactly.
So Matthew, when you look at this and you look at the future state of this and by the way, to the audience, I know we're getting some questions in here and there, but if you do have any questions, just use the chat box and the lower function within the main stage, the lower right-hand side of the main stage, and feel free to ask questions there. And also just link in with these folks. They're one of the reasons that they're doing this is to help share information, to help make new connections, to help really the healthcare system become better enabled during this time. So look them up on LinkedIn as well, and please do connect with them on LinkedIn. But Matt, we look at this and we talk about social media. We talk about these incredible technologies that you and your team have been testing and working with. What are some of the future technologies that you're seeing evolve, and what are some of the where do you see this future of the supply chain going within the virtual experience and to really improve the virtual experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can think about it in a couple of ways, right? So the more recently, you see a shift towards personalized medicine, which creates a supply chain that's not just unique to a population or unique to a geography, but unique to a patient, right? And so some sort of manipulation needs to be done to the drug in advance of dosing. The complexity associated with that kind of supply chain is immense, right? And it drives us to shift our, not just our ability to ship medication, but our manufacturing of that medication closer to the patient. And so doing that in a modular but yet scalable way is a critical component of the future state supply chain. The ability to deliver those medications to remote areas, either remote because they're undeveloped, remote because there's some sort of disaster going on, or earthquake, typhoon, who knows, pandemic. Certainly, the shift towards the ability to deliver those medications via drone or some very, very customized delivery methodology in absence of roads it is, I think, a critical component of the supply chain as well. And the ability to ensure that we can monitor that drug for the full life of its journey. Excuse me, again, not just did it get to our depot properly, and then from depot to site, then from site to patient. That's the kind of the traditional clinical supply chain. Here we may be looking at shipping directly from our own warehouse to a patient, or from our own depot directly to a patient, and having that ability and traceability of that drug and its shipment, ensuring that it gets to where it needs to get to. Perhaps it's coordinated with a home health nurse if it needs to be administered via IV and the patient needs a healthcare professional there to be able to do that. That's a critical component as well. All of these aim towards shifting the patient or shifting the trial towards the patient and removing the barriers that are impeding individuals' ability to participate in trials, whether those barriers are awareness, as Alicia mentioned, in leveraging social media to drive awareness of opportunity, or removing barriers in terms of the ability to get the medication in its proper state to the patient so that they can get it in whatever form and whatever atmosphere, location they're in. Those are all critical components.
Yeah, I think when I start seeing drones coming out my front door to drop off my medication, whether it's for my clinical trial or whatever, I'm hoping at least it has a Yankees logo on it. Maybe, I don't know. If we can make drones a little bit kind of cheeky, that might be a little less intimidating. I don't know.
We'll work on that. I know. So Merck did a pilot. Our commercial side did a pilot, and I think it might have been 2017, with some drone delivery of medication, and I believe it was in Africa. You can probably look that up. I think it was Skybox was the name of the vendor that we were using, with a program that we were involved in at the time. It's something that's definitely on our radar. Again, recognizing the need to be able to reach patients wherever they are. That's
great. Yeah, I think, Alicia's from Syracuse. She went to Syracuse, so maybe a very orange drone or something. Or, Michael's from Canada, so, and Canadians are always like overly polite and fair. So maybe a Canadian maple leaf. I mean, you could have something, something that's got some essence there. That's incredible. No, I'm looking forward to that. That's amazing. I mean, I'm already getting my groceries from Amazon in 2 hours. So, if we can get that down to like 5 minutes, then I mean, that's fantastic. I'm all for that. So let's keep that going, Michael. Let's pick up on that thread a little bit and talk a little bit about these technologies. And again, we've talked a little bit about your background and the importance of engineering around this. And where do you see the future? I mean, you've been doing this now for almost 30 years. And why are virtual patients in clinical trials so important?
Look, let's go back to your original question. Why are we doing what we're doing, and why are we so steadfast in holding on to the way we're doing it? We were actually from the get-go engineering smart packages that communicate via passive RFID for a reason. We want packages that last the life cycle of a clinical trial that's counted in years. They need to be run on non-rechargeable batteries. It needs to be small and thin enough to hide within a standard cardboard blister package or a bottle cap, a medication bottle cap. So we have not gone out to engineer solutions that look technologically amazing, because we're actually trying to hide ourselves as much as possible. So we don't get a lot of credit for that, as you can imagine. In this largest trial we didn't even have any markings on the outside of our packages. So there's been absolutely no recognition of the importance we played in actually being able to enable a very critical data set, in generating a very critical data set that enabled a successful FDA priority approval of a blockbuster drug. So I'd like to get that out there, because it's actually was a major milestone of success. So unfortunately, because we're so clandestine in both in a corporate level, as well as on the technology that's hidden inside the standard packaging, it takes a while for this to diffuse, right? It takes a while for people to actually realize that, oh, there's some amazing stuff going on here. And further on, we believe that the patient shouldn't be burdened with a bunch of technology in order for the clinical research team to address the issue of non-adherence. So we build packages that really the patient has to do nothing else than take the medication as usual. Now we can, it generates the data, and we can layer on top of it certain protocols that allow this data to be accessed by the patient or by the site, or we can do absolutely nothing with it other than record it and use it for the final analytics and ongoing monitoring of the clinical research. And that's pretty much 80% of what we've been doing. In terms of clinic visits, where our technology is applied, for instance, at Montefiore, they have Einstein has a community clinic where certain patients are given smart packages because it makes them, more able to function throughout the day. They don't have to go to a clinic every day or twice a day or however many times a week in order to pick up their dose, right? If a patient has shown that they can be trusted with a package of medication, they're given that, they can pursue their regular activities, maybe return every 2 weeks, and have that data analyzed by the physician, who then can decide to give them another package for 2 weeks. So it buys a lot of freedom for the patient. And now, of course, with patients not even possibly allowed to go to a clinic, it takes on a whole new meaning, right? But it also allows the clinic to concentrate on the walk-in patients, or the people that actually need the care, not the ones that don't. And I think that's really important. And so our technology doesn't require the patient to wear a patch, do anything, take a picture of themselves, have a mobile connection, have a Wi-Fi connection, connect the thing to a Bluetooth on their phone, which they might have lost, or anything like that. The only thing that could possibly happen is they lose the package itself. And that does happen occasionally. But that's there's always a residual risk of something, right?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think that's certainly, when we look at where the future of this is going, it's about passive data collection. And when we look at where the future of this has to focus, it's around being able to make trials happen with much less friction and with much less difficulty. And I think that's something that, Medidata has been helping out a lot with. And, Alicia, going back to that story of, Glenn building up this relational database in the 1990s to improve and reduce the friction, he was thinking about it from the investigator standpoint. He was thinking about it from the department chair standpoint, who asked him and said, the guy was like, Glenn, we need a database to store this patient data better. Can you do something with it? And, Glenn coming out of Carnegie Mellon with a, with a computer science background, that was like a dream come true. Like that was where his bread and butter was. So you have, so Medidata, and certainly yourself as a 3-time cancer survivor, have very unique perspectives on this. And, what is the, what is Medidata's role in reducing that friction for patient recruitment. One of the most difficult things I have to do in my studies is I'll start trying to recruit a study for people that are over 65 who've had a stroke, but it's their first time stroke and it's a non-TIA stroke, and they can dance the flamingo. You know, I've got like the flamenco, I've got all kinds of like inclusion criteria, exclusion criteria. Recruiting is a nightmare. And so, and how does Medidata work on that? And what is Medidata doing to reduce the friction for the investigator, and again, to enhance the experience for the virtual patient just on the recruitment side?
Yeah, great question. So, you know, over the last year, we've brought in resources to really begin to build out the recruitment aspect of the work that we're doing. So right now we're in a phase where I think we're trying to really learn and understand all the pain points when it comes to recruitment. But I think, you know, the industry at large has a really good idea of some of these challenges. And like you said, you know, you're sometimes looking for a patient, it's almost like looking for a needle in a haystack based on, you know, the criteria or the inclusion exclusion criteria that you need to fit for the patient to actually move into the trial. It can be very, very difficult. But I think what we're doing is really looking at all these sources and all these signals to help us figure out how to begin to remove some of these barriers, these friction points, because like you said, delivering a frictionless patient experience is what we're all working for. I mean, that's the ideal that you want to get to, and it's figuring out where the burden is and how to address it. And you know, to Matt's point, in the era of precision medicine, that's a very individualistic approach that you have to take. That, you know, if you're truly looking for that patient that's going to fit an extraordinary profile, this becomes a challenge. It's no longer just casting a wide net and hoping that you're going to get patients that sort of fall into your funnel and move them through the clinical trial. So you have to get smart about what you're listening to, the signals that you're paying attention to, and then being able to act on those. So it's from the metadata perspective, it's making sure that we can operationalize or act on that information that we're seeing come back from patient communities, from sites, from sponsors, in terms of how recruitment is going. So it's an evolving process, but I think for us, from the metadata perspective, it's all part of that continuum that we have to begin to engage in. You can no longer really function in one small slice of this industry. You have to be able to have that holistic approach to truly understand and value the patient perspective in a clinical trial. It's so important.
Yeah, I think, and that's, again, it goes toward just how much metadata is able to offer across the spectrum there, which is extraordinary. And you know, Matt, I know you guys use metadata as well, and you know, and IMC as well. So you're working with everyone, Matt. So the idea is that your success and some of the biggest successes you've seen in terms of building a supply chain process that's going to support that virtual patient experience. What are some of the things that you've tested? I mean, you've done, you've written some peer-reviewed papers. I was looking you up on Google Scholar last night. Again, being a researcher, I love doing that. And you know, when you think about building that virtual patient experience and within the supply chain, you know, how are you doing this? What kind of methods? What kind of techniques? Test and learn, start small, build fast. How are you approaching this kind of development process? Because I mean, Merck's not a small company. You know, you've got a lot of studies going on, and you know, for you guys to start embedding technologies in the supply chain, it's going to affect a lot of people. But you know, Merck's also one of the leaders out there. Usually, when Merck does something, everyone comes and starts doing it 5 or 10 years later. And I got plenty of stories there too. It's amazing just having been doing this for 30 years. You know, what's your methodology for bringing in and slowly getting the technology adopted, and you know, kind of testing it first and then trying to scale it internally?
And I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of one of the most interesting portions of this journey, which is really, how do you affect change at such a large company, and how do you affect change that's so inherently impacts the culture and kind of the way that folks look at things. This is not just an incremental shift, this is exponential or paradigm changing shift with regard to the way that we look at technologies, and getting investment and buy-in from senior leadership to take this journey. You know, this is not, you know, we spend money and we get an immediate return on investment, right? We need to build foundation here, and that always requires some level of investment, whether it's time, whether it's dollars, and then ultimately whether it's the culture shift that comes along with it. And so the drive, the creating a structure that allows us to do that really started small. It started with a pilot trial, and then a second pilot trial, and then some very targeted investment based on what we learned from those pilot trials, along with the willingness of senior leadership to see the potential value, to listen to us and to see the potential value that could be derived from these. And so you can certainly look up, we have published on 2 of our pilot trials in the past. You're welcome to look those up. Those articles are available. But that really shaped kind of a foundation for, this is the possible. Now let's take what we learned from the possible and identify a couple of key areas of focus that are informed by maximum value to the participants in the trial. And at the center of all that needs to be the patient, right? Because there's no trial without the patient. And then how can we improve the patient's experience and their ability to participate in the trial by investing strategically in technologies to allow us either better flexibility in getting medications to patients, understanding the medication used by the patient, or ensuring that despite the geography of the patient, that they can still participate in the trial. And then again, using that patient-centric view to drive the messaging home to senior leadership to get them to consent to allow us to do what we want to do in an experimental space, proving in an experimental space that it works, and then driving that into our trial structure. Depending on the type of technology or the approach used, perhaps we start small in the early phase, you know, in a phase 1 trial where we're in a much more controlled environment. Perhaps we dive right into phase 2, which I think a lot of times is really our bread and butter, where we're truly understanding, is the molecule safe and efficacious, and in the real world, quote unquote, where we take medication out of the clinic and into the patient's hands and see what happens with it. I think that's, you know, the approach that we've used is targeted installation based on proven principles, based on proven and piloted principles. That's really kind of the approach that we've used.
So yeah, so it sounds like it's almost like you've adopted kind of a new clinical trial process for test and learns, and for integrating that technology, first testing it and then learning how it works and then integrating it and scaling it. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And we did that in a couple of different avenues. You could do it in a phase 1 setting where you can, you know, in a very small population, small number of sites and under great control, you can deploy an initial technology. We can do it with an employee user group that we have if we want to do some real kind of true, you know, naive user, but non-patient user experience testing. And then we can scale that appropriately based on the success of those applications.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, you know, certainly I'm sure, you know, intelligent packaging solutions are part of that process. And so, you know, Michael, from your perspective and your standpoint, what are you seeing in terms of that these sorts of intelligent packaging solutions being a part of that virtual patient experience and improving that experience? And how are you seeing that? Again, you've seen it now for 20 years, you know, at a number of different settings and, you know, hundreds of different sponsors. How have you seen intelligent packaging solutions improving the virtual patient experience?
Well, with the virtualization of trials and the remote trial deployment, I believe that this kind of intelligent packaging solutions and adherence data collection without placing burden on patients is moving from being an option or at times a painful must-have into basically GCP practice, good clinical practice, and will become gold standard. And these things can happen occasionally very quickly once the pressure builds up on the industry to adopt, because there's really no choice. The existing methodology of relying on self-reporting or just guesstimating adherence is just not tenable. You know, there's thousands of research papers and hundreds or even thousands of articles and editorials from, you know, people way smarter than me who've pointed this out, and it is actually in the end a really good ROI. We spent 2 years doing statistical research, literally, and modeling ROI, and you know, one of the most amazing endpoints of collecting adherence data is that you can then feed it back into your clinical study power models and really reduce the number of patients you need to enroll in order to have the same, you know, maintain the same power of your statistical power in your study. If you do that, you're actually reaching your final patient visit sooner. And in a blockbuster drug development, that can have huge payoffs. You're talking about millions of dollars a day in revenue gained if you're getting to market 6 months earlier. Spending a few $1 million on smart packaging or even a few tens of millions of dollars over the course of a trial is peanuts compared to the benefits that you're deriving. And then, of course, with future partially synthetic trials being run, you're going to, you know, leverage this even further because you've got these accurate data points. So your overlays will match more closely to your expectation, rather than seeing that, oh, how come my previous trial outcome didn't match what we actually found in the new trial? There must be something. Well, it's probably adherence. You know, narrowly missed endpoints, which I've read frequently, way too frequently, which destroy, basically shipwreck hundreds of millions of dollars worth of investment, should be a thing of the past. And they should be a thing, they should have been a thing of the past, you know, 10 years ago, but certainly I think the pressure is building now that that switch is turning on.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. And I think, you know, getting that switch turned on and trying to figure that out is going to be something that we've got to think about, not just for the US and the EU and North America and you know, kind of some of the Asian countries, but in Australia, but also some, you know, some of the poor countries out there. Some of the work that we do at the lab is with the World Bank, the WHO, the Global Fund, Gates Foundation, and we're working with Latin America, Africa, Asia, and it's really focused on how do we bring these technologies to the poorest 100 countries, the poorest 1 billion people. And you know, Alicia, your Medidata is a global company. You've just been purchased by Dassault Systems, you know, another major global company. What is it that you see Medidata doing, and how is, and a lot of clinical trials are done in these countries, and how has Medidata helped bring the virtual patient experience to, and again, this is coming from Ashwani, one of the audience members, to these countries and to the poorest 1 billion people?
Yeah, I think the way that we've approached it is making sure that every country that we're working in or dealing with, understanding the regulations around, or the different regulations that might prevent a virtualization of a clinical trial. So it's making sure that we're operating in the right framework for every country that we're in delivering the clinical trial. But it's also, again, it's about building partnerships across the globe. And, you know, I hate to be sort of a one note kind of person here, but for me, it's about understanding the patient populations that we're trying to serve. So exactly what you just said, you know, how do you reach the poorest people across the globe, or how do you deal, or, you know, I think Matt, you made the comment about how do you reach people when there's no roads to get to where they live. I mean, you've got to be able to look at all of these different inputs, sort of be able to assess the situation and then deploy technology or deploy resources in the most efficient way to reach those people. And I think it's very specific to where you are or what scenario you're trying to address. But, you know, having that kind of flexibility or building, you know, what we really like to say is a technological ecosystem that can address all these different kinds of inputs and constraints, and being able to efficiently address those issues, I think is really, it's critical. But, you know, personally, the work that I'm doing at Medidata is beginning to build relationships with patient advocacy groups all over the world, to begin to really understand the burden and the barriers that each of these countries or each of these disease states are dealing with when it comes to clinical research, and trying to look at the signals, look at what's coming back from this analysis and find the right path forward, because it's a lot of data and a lot of inputs to review, to make decisions that are most effective for almost to a patient, being able to provide value patient by patient. And it's not an easy proposition, I'll tell you.
No, it's not. I know we were working with Google a few years ago. Matt, you talked about drones and actually having APIs for Google Maps and medication delivery for clinical trials in Somalia using drones. So forget an address. No one was being delivered medication by an address. It was all around just a satellite GPS location, and drones then delivering the medication for the clinical trial to GPS locations. So is that the kind of thing that you're envisioning, Matt, with drones and maybe with, with either Orange or with the Canadian maple leaf on them? Is that kind of the future of the virtual patient for some of the poorer countries and people in the world?
Yeah, I think that, and that's the customization comes in all aspects, including decals on the drones. We'll definitely work on that. But I think that is the future in all seriousness. It's rapid delivery of safe medications with a fully understood supply chain and end-to-end to any patient anywhere in the world.
That's fantastic. And so that wraps us up. Again, thank you very much, panel, for a tremendous amount of knowledge. In just an hour, I feel like I've learned about 50 new things. And again, Alicia and Matthew and Michael, I know you all are very busy in this time, in this age. All of your companies are serving tremendous purposes as the foundations of the virtual patient and rapidly digitizing our healthcare system during the pandemic. So thank you very much. Stay safe and have a great holidays. Thank you, Justin.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you once again to our incredible panel. Joining us back here now at the HitLab Innovators Summit. Thank you all so very much for joining us. Up next, we'll be